Have you ever met someone so unexpectedly that it felt less like chance and more like destiny whispering your name? Imagine driving down a lonely road, believing the journey was yours alone, only to discover a stranger who feels like they've always belonged to your soul. What begins as a simple encounter soon becomes a connection that blurs the lines between chance and fate, between protection and passion, between what is safe to call love and what your heart secretly craves. Sometimes the most powerful stories begin not with answers, but with questions you cannot ignore. The road stretched endlessly ahead, a ribbon of asphalt glimmering under the morning sun, and she drove with a steady rhythm, as though the hum of the engine could quiet the thoughts she carried. She had told herself this trip was about freedom, about seeing what lay beyond the walls she had built, but in truth it was more about searching for something unnamed, something her heart had longed for without ever admitting. Her hands rested lightly on the wheel, yet her chest carried the weight of years spent moving through life without direction. The open sky above felt like an invitation to begin again. The landscapes shifted around her, each curve of the road opening into fields, hills, and stretches of silence that spoke louder than words. The wind touched her face as though reminding her she was alive, though her spirit still carried shadows of loneliness. It wasn't about the distance she traveled, but the possibility of leaving behind what no longer served her. Every mile was a step further from emptiness, yet she wondered if the void inside could truly be filled by movement alone. It was along one of those stretches, quiet and endless, that she saw him. A boy, standing with a small bag, his eyes searching in the same way hers had. There was hesitation in her, the instinct to drive on, but something in his presence called out to her heart. She slowed, pulled over, and for the first time in a long while, she allowed herself to act without logic. He looked at her with a mix of surprise and hope, and in that moment, she smiled gently and said words that felt natural, though unexpected. "Come on, my son." The phrase wasn't calculated. It was born of something deeper, as if her soul had recognized his before her mind had. He stepped inside, and silence filled the space at first, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was the silence of two people who belonged on the same journey, though neither could explain why. His presence softened the edges of her solitude, and the air between them felt lighter. She noticed how his eyes reflected both innocence and weariness, a mirror of what she herself had carried for years. He looked at her with curiosity, but also with a kind of trust that takes most people years to earn. They began to move forward again, the road no longer belonging to one traveler, but two. She found herself speaking, not forced, but naturally sharing small thoughts about the passing views, about the freedom of the open road. He responded quietly at first, then with growing ease, as though he too had been waiting for someone to listen. With every exchange, a thread was woven between them, delicate yet strong. It was not mother and son in the traditional sense, nor strangers merely sharing a ride. It was something in between, undefined yet deeply real. Her heart stirred with an unfamiliar warmth, not of obligation but of connection. She had set out to escape the silence of her own life, and in him she found an echo of what she had been missing. He wasn't just a boy on the side of the road. He was a companion written into her story at the exact moment she needed him. The miles continued, and with each one, the bond deepened, unspoken yet undeniable, a reminder that sometimes the people we meet by chance are the ones our souls have been searching for all along. The road seemed different now, not because of where it led, but because of the company it carried. What had begun as a solitary escape was slowly turning into something unexpected. She found herself noticing details she would have ignored before. How the boy's laughter lightened the air, how his questions broke the silence into meaningful pauses, how his presence shifted the journey from endurance into something resembling joy. The miles no longer stretched endlessly. They unfolded like chapters, each moment adding to the quiet rhythm of discovery between them. At first, their exchanges were small, but they carried a weight far deeper than casual conversation. He spoke of things he longed for, dreams that seemed too distant for his years, and fears that revealed how heavy solitude had been for him. She listened without judgment, not because she had answers, but because her own heart recognized the ache of searching. His words reminded her of the emptiness she once tried to bury beneath routine, and in that reflection, she began to feel something she had not in years: understanding. Meals at roadside stops turned into shared rituals. She would push a plate toward him, teasing him for eating too quickly, and he would smile in a way that made her forget the weight of the past. Music played softly as they drove, and he would hum along, sometimes off-key, sometimes with surprising tenderness. She found herself singing with him, her voice hesitant at first, then freer, carried not by skill, but by the simple happiness of sharing. The car became less of a vehicle and more of a sanctuary where time slowed and the outside world could not intrude. Nights carried their own kind of magic. When the sky stretched above them, filled with stars scattered like secrets across the heavens, they spoke more openly. He told her about moments of loneliness, times when he felt invisible, and how strange it felt to be seen by her so quickly, so deeply. She, in turn, admitted that freedom was not always enough, that sometimes the greatest ache was having no one to share it with. In those exchanges, something unspoken began to grow, not bound by names or roles, but by the undeniable pull of connection. There were silences too, but they were no longer empty. They were filled with trust, with comfort, with the knowledge that presence alone was enough. She began to realize she was not simply guiding him. He was healing her. His innocence, his openness, his ability to be unguarded reminded her of what it meant to feel alive without fear. She had called him her son at first, perhaps to protect herself from the depth of what she felt, yet with every passing mile, that word seemed less like a label and more like a veil covering something she did not yet dare to name. Every turn of the road deepened the bond, drawing them closer in ways neither could ignore. What began as chance was revealing itself as destiny, a meeting that could not be explained by coincidence alone. The warmth between them carried an intimacy that transcended simple definitions, a tenderness that felt at once maternal, romantic, and profoundly human. In his company, she felt a kind of peace she had been chasing for years, and in hers, he found not only care but the quiet recognition that he mattered. Together, they became more than travelers sharing a road. They became mirrors of each other's longing, companions written into the same story by something greater than choice. The closeness between them grew with every mile, but so did the questions that neither could speak aloud. She felt her heart stirring in ways she had not expected, a tenderness that both comforted and unsettled her. She had named him her son when they first met, a word that gave her safety, a word that shielded her from the truth of what she felt. Yet, as days passed, the title no longer matched the rhythm of their bond. It wasn't maternal duty that bound her to him, but a deeper pull, something that blurred the lines between protection, companionship, and desire for closeness that words could not easily hold. The boy, too, seemed to wrestle with unspoken emotions. He looked at her with gratitude, but beneath it lingered a softness that reached beyond simple appreciation. His silences grew heavier, not because of distance, but because of the weight of what he did not know how to say. He seemed to sense the conflict inside her. The way her eyes lingered a little longer than they should, the way her voice trembled when she spoke his name. He mirrored those feelings in his own subtle ways, choosing moments of quiet touch. A brush of hands when passing something, a smile that lingered just a second too long, an expression that carried meaning unspoken yet undeniable. The road was not without its trials, and those challenges revealed how deeply they had come to depend on each other. When the car faltered under heavy rain, when the wind pressed hard against the windows, when they found themselves uncertain of where to go next, It was not frustration that rose between them, but loyalty. They sat together in the storm, their silence stronger than the chaos outside. He held her gaze as though to assure her that she was not alone, and she felt the strength of something rare, love born not of circumstance, but of souls recognizing each other in their most vulnerable moments. The journey tested them, but the tests only carved their bond deeper. She realized that every obstacle was a mirror, showing her how far she had come from the woman who once traveled only to escape herself. Now, she was not escaping, she was discovering. And in that discovery, she saw him not as a boy she had rescued, but as someone who had rescued her just as much. He had lifted her spirit in ways she could not have imagined, and in his presence, she found herself daring to hope again. The turning point came in the quietest way. One night, unable to sleep, they watched the horizon as the first light of dawn spread across the sky. The air was still. The world hushed as though it too waited for what would come next. They did not speak, but their silence carried the weight of confession. In the glow of the rising sun, her hand found his, not in obligation, but in surrender. He did not pull away. Instead, he held her hand with a gentleness that spoke louder than words, an acknowledgement of the truth they both carried. In that fragile moment, there was no longer room for titles or shields. The bond between them had grown into something that refused to be contained by names. It was not about who they were supposed to be, but about who they had become together. Two souls bound by fate, drawn not by logic, but by love that defied every boundary. She knew then that their journey had changed everything, that the path behind them had been leading to this moment all along. The future remained uncertain, but one truth was clear. They could no longer return to who they had been before they found each other. The journey that began as an escape was now a path neither of them wished to end. The road still stretched ahead, but it no longer felt like an endless search. It felt like home, carried not in a place but in the presence they had found in each other. She thought of the words she had used when they first met, calling him her son, and she understood now that it had been her way of keeping the truth at a distance. It had been easier to hide behind the safety of a name than to face the reality of what was unfolding. But the bond between them had outgrown the word. What they shared could not be confined by labels. It was something freer, deeper, something that lived in the quiet space between their hearts. She began to see how much she had changed. Once, she carried loneliness like a second skin, masking it with routines and escapes. Now, her heart carried light, not because her life had become easier, but because it had become shared. His presence filled the silence with meaning, his laughter stitched joy into her days, and his eyes reflected the hope she thought she had lost forever. She realized that love is not always found where the world tells you to look. Sometimes it arrives in unexpected forms, in people who were never meant to be strangers, in meetings that feel written long before they happen. He, too, had changed. No longer the boy standing lost on the roadside. He carried himself with a quiet strength that came from being seen, valued, and loved. He found in her not just care but recognition, the kind that told him he was no longer invisible. She had given him more than companionship. She had given him belonging. And in return, he had given her the one thing she had been missing, the courage to let herself feel again. Their bond was not about filling roles, but about completing spaces within each other that had been empty for too long. As their journey drew toward its end, the question of destination no longer mattered. The places they passed, the towns they left behind, the miles they covered, all of it became secondary to the truth they had uncovered. It was never about where the road led, but about who they had become along the way. She no longer feared the uncertainty of tomorrow, because tomorrow was no longer something she faced alone. With him beside her, the unknown became a promise instead of a threat. The love they shared was not bound by rules or expectations. It was not something they needed to explain or justify. It existed because it was meant to, because two souls recognized each other in the vastness of the world and chose to walk the same path. It was tender, it was brave, and it was real. She no longer clung to the word son, because what they had was something greater, an unshakable connection that defied titles, born of destiny rather than choice. The horizon opened before them, endless and bright, a reflection of the life waiting ahead. She reached for his hand once more, and he met hers with the same quiet certainty as before. In that touch lived every moment of their journey, the laughter, the storms, the silences, the confessions without words. They did not need to say what they already knew, that they had found in each other what they had been searching for all along. The road stretched forward, not as an escape, but as a shared future. And they moved toward it together, carrying a love that was both unexpected and eternal.